Hello, everybody. Thank you for showing up to the online version of my lecture. Hopefully, it's a little more convenient for you. But I do want to make sure you know that this will close down at 4:20, which is the same time as class gets over. So I figure it makes sense that you will essentially be getting the same thing as in class except for online. So obviously I know there's going to be some questions that I won't be able to answer, but that's going to be all ready. We can talk about all of those things next time, and this is something I also wanted to spend more time on anyway next Monday. So okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Let's see, go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so as we talked about before, right, we have sort of this this hierarchy of how memory or how knowledge is represented in our long-term memory and in our short-term memory. And so, of course, there's specific things that we can do to, to work on the incoming sensory stimuli that we are experiencing, and hopefully when we rehearse use repetition, as we've talked about, called rehearsal maintenance, if we chunk items together so that we can um, uh, actually remember, instead of 10 numbers, if it's like a phone number, we're remembering only 3 chunks. So it's important to know that even though we say 7 plus or minus 2, that's the number of items we can hold in our short-term memory in the 20 or 30 seconds we have. We're going to keep in mind that it's really chunks. So later on in the semester, I'm going to show you an example of a person who is able to make chunks out of hundreds, thousands of random numbers, and to memorize that, a memory championship. And he uses chunking quite a bit. Chunking and something else called elaborative rehearsal, which elaborative rehearsal is when you have information you've paid attention to, it's meaningful to you, it's in your working memory or in your short-term memory, and to keep it there, and the goal would be to get it into long-term memory, you would connect it to prior knowledge. So even though you only have 30 seconds to do this, if the information is important enough to you, you're going to pull from your long-term memory and see if there's any matches. Okay, so for example, I might have mentioned this in class by using the very simple example of a phone number. So most of us, if we're given a phone number, we can't write it down, we repeat it over and over, which is part of the phonological loop, so we can hear it. And then we would possibly picture it in our head, which is the visual spatial sketchpad. And then we might pull something from our episodic buffer, which is connected directly to our long-term memory. And so with that, we can maybe remember something in short-term memory. So if someone gives us a phone number, can't write it down, we could use maintenance rehearsal, we could use chunking, but we also could use old knowledge. So if there's a familiarity with it, if say the first 3 numbers are, or I should say, the 4 numbers, okay, at the end are the same or similar to yours or somebody you know really well, then that's going to offload some of that cognitive heaviness that you feel when you're trying to repeat something over and over just so you can get it out onto paper or out on your phone. So, right. So we know that our short-term memory. That's what we do with working memory. Now We've started to talk about long-term memory, but we're always going to keep going back to the short-term part because working memory is what we know now of all the different proposed models of working memory. We know that working memory is sort of constantly evolving, and at this point, we're seeing that there is a definite interaction and overlap between working memory and long-term memory. So I suppose, I'm sorry, I should probably have this up. So we had talked about the visual spatial sketchpad and phonological loops. So again, I know you've read about this and we've talked about this in class, but I just want to reiterate this because it's actually really important to the lecture and to the video we're going to be watching today. And so we have so say we're in a class and your professor is up there talking and there's, notes on the board or on PowerPoint, and there's visuals even, okay? So our central executive sort of balances out and decides, okay, what is the best way that we can get that information? What is the best way that we can find good information from that and make it meaningful? So we have these components that work together, but they have to be coordinated, right? So the phonological loop, what we're doing is we're kind of hearing the teacher, okay? And we are when we're writing notes, sometimes we're kind of hearing what we write, or we're reading silently, reading our notes over, or reading the board. Okay, so sometimes we're reading the chalkboard or reading the notes on the PowerPoint, and we can hear that sound over and over of our voice. Okay, we talked about that as being called subvocalization, and that's that little voice that we have to hear because our reading and our understanding and comprehension of what we read is directly connected to our auditory lobe, which is a part of our temporal part of our cortex. So hearing is essential to the phonological loop. So we have to hear that information in order for us to remember it. However, there's the visual and spatial part of it where we have to see it as well. So you've probably experienced maybe a class where there aren't any visuals at all. Maybe the instructor is just standing there and just talking. Okay, and that's how it used to be in the old days, right? They'd just come in and they would profess, hence professor, and then they would leave the room. So in those days, you would just really be using your phonological loop, but also the visual spatial sketchpad would be in play just because you'd be able to see the professor. Now, there's times when online teaching was sort of new that we didn't have the software where we could actually have videos or show the slideshow. So we would really be relying on our just our listening. Okay, so just the phonological loop. So that's what we know is that the central executive sort of balances that out. So if we are listening to the professor and maybe in our head we're kind of reiterating or remembering stuff, but then we also are seeing something cool or seeing something related, or even if the professor is someone who doesn't just stand there and talk in monotone like this, but they have tone and volume and changes in their voice, and they might make animations with their hands, and all of that comes together in order for us to remember that information, especially if it's meaningful. So the central executive is the component that balances those out and makes sure that we're using both in a learning situation. Okay. So the episodic buffer is used to sort of offload all of the work the central executive does. So we have the central executive actually taking a lot of the attentional mechanisms that we talked about before. So those filter systems or the bottleneck systems or the attenuation, all of those things, taking from the central executive is dealing with, trying to also balance with the phonological loop and the visual spatial sketchpad, and it's a lot of work. So the central executive, according to Alan Baddeley, who is the guru on working memory, there had to be something else that is making us learn and know, and making the 20 to 30-second short-term memory working, besides phonological loop, besides what we hear and what we see. uh, there's some kind of learning going on besides just sort of that flat surface level uh, um, you know uh, um, acquisition. Okay, so the episodic buffer was a part component, and the episodic buffer, as you see here, is, as we believe now, directly related to the long-term memory, specifically episodic long-term memory, which, if we go back here, we see that we have, the um, long-term memory, right? And then we have, oh, I'm sorry, and we have the explicit and implicit memory, and then our episodic memory and semantic memory are both here. So just a little bit of review there. Now today we're going to look at some special cases of episodic memory, specific personal events, and the context in which they occur. So one thing that I wanted to ask you, and I know that it's sort of hard to do online, is if you look at those pennies without cheating, don't look at a penny that you have. Just give yourself a minute, look at the 10 pennies above, and tell me which one is the correct penny. And you can pause this if you want to, give it a little more time without looking at a penny, but just trying to figure out what that is. So actually, we'll go ahead and pause it if you're not sure. Okay, and obviously you unpaused it, so hopefully you have a good idea, but the actual answer is F. Okay, so that is the correct penny. However, all of you have used a penny before, right? All of you know about a penny. It's got kind of that copper color. It's not necessarily made of copper anymore, and it's round. Okay, so you could recognize a penny. You use a penny for, I don't know, maybe you are making a wish in a wishing fountain. You're making change. It's really hard with pennies because they're not worth a lot, but we still, if we need to make exact change, like $6.32, then we would use pennies, right? So we know it's part of our the way that we exchange goods, and how our capitalist way of using money to buy something. But why do we not know? We know all of that. We've used pennies before. We've seen pennies, but why is it hard to find or figure out to remember what the actual penny looks like? Well, here's a thought. So, as long as we have meaning, and let me go back for a second. So our short-term memory, okay, if we are trying to remember something and keep it in short-term memory or working memory, then what's really important is the basic stuff, is the surface area stuff. We don't have time to gather meaning, okay? We do have time to repeat over and over, okay? We do have time to memorize and let quickly, and maybe chunk or some other type of visualization process that we go through to remember information, mnemonic devices, things like that. But really short term and a minimal amount of meaningfulness. And so the long term, though, is all about meaning. It's all about the semantics. And so our brains don't have the room, or even if we have room, we don't want to fill our brains, okay? And because we don't want to fill our brains, we've talked about that. One of the reasons for that is if there was a life or death situation, and we had way too much cognitive overload, then we may not be able to survive. We would be suppressing our amygdala, or our fear um, fear center, right? Our emotional center, our fight or flight center. Okay, um, so we don't really need to know exactly what's on the penny. We just need to know how to use it and why it's important for us in our life. Okay, so anyway, so this is just an example, but if I asked you about a movie that you saw recently, I'm probably going to ask you to give me a summary. I'm not going to ask you about the I don't know, the third, at the end of the first 20 minutes, what was the main character wearing on their feet. Okay, so obviously you can't watch a whole movie and get every single detail. It would be, like I said, an overload, and it would not be productive or efficient for our brains, and needed, not needed at all. I'll just take a summary, okay? I don't need to have every single possible detail, just the gist of it. And our long-term memory works exactly that way, just the gist of something, okay? However, there are very few people, it's rare, but there are very, very few people that do have a mental condition called hyperthymesia. And this is when a person can remember episodes from every single day that they've lived. So they remember details, weather, time, who they're with, any given day or date in the past, and they can tell you anything from what they had for lunch, to what the weather was, to what shoes they wore. Okay, so this is hyperthymesia, and if you think about it, you think about if that would be something you would enjoy having, hyperthymesia. Probably not, okay? Maybe it would be good if you were in a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend and you could remember every single thing that happened, so you can throw that back on their face when you're arguing. But otherwise, I personally would think feel like an overload. It would, even the bad stuff you remember details of, sometimes the bad stuff we like to kind of try to separate ourselves from, but we'd still remember every single thing. So that's not a great thing, okay? But anyway, so I want to have you watch a video about, there are originally 6 people that, as far as I know, in the United States, I don't know if I did a world search, but at least in the United States, 6 people that came forth and said, okay, I can remember every single detail of every day of my life. And so this video is from a show called 60 Minutes, and it's just kind of a 13-minute video about explaining and showing what these people can do. And part of it also is looking at the brain structures and how they may be the same or different than other brain structures. So, and we're going to save the brain structure stuff, for next Monday, because I find that to be really important to kind of go deeper into. However, here is the link to superior autobiographical memory. And remember, these are the first 6. Since then, more people have come out who have what they call hyperthymesia. And this is, what, maybe 8 years ago, something like that. So, but it's very interesting, and you can even read more on YouTube, or watch more if you like. But I'd like you to watch this, and then your quiz will be based on the parts of this little lecture, but a lot on the video that you're about to see. So please take notes, and like I said, this will be let's see, yeah, so we have still an hour, and keep this video up, and so you can watch it over if you need to. And I guess I would suggest doing the quiz as soon as I get it up. It's not up quite yet, but I'll let you know, and in the meantime, give you time to take some more notes and watch this video. If you have any other questions, please let me know. I know some of you probably have some questions about your upcoming research project, but you can always come to my office hours tomorrow between 11:30 and 1, or our TA would be Allison, would be happy to help you as well. So with that said, please watch this video, and I will see you soon. Thank you.